Hello, good people. This is Sister Julia Walsh, and you're listening to Messy Jesus Business. Welcome to the Mess. I'm here with Father James Martin, a Jesuit priest who is editor-at-large of America Media, consultor to the Vatican's Dicastery for Communication, and founder of Outreach, a Catholic news and opinion site for LGBTQ Catholics. Father Martin is the author of numerous books, including the New York Times bestsellers Jesus, a Pilgrimage, The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything, and, most recently, Come Forth, The Promise of Jesus' Greatest Miracle. Hi, Father James Martin. Welcome back to Messy Jesus Business.
Thank you, Julia. Nice to be with you. And you can call me Jim throughout the conversation.
Okay, thanks. I'm so grateful you are giving the time to come back to the show. I feel like we're partners in the spirit and in our work. And you continue to witness and serve in so many ways. You've had so many experiences since our last conversation. I think in 2020 was the last time we talked, maybe 2021.
Wow. Yeah. Is that right? Gosh, it's so funny. It feels like it was recent.
Yeah, I know. So much life has happened, but
That's right.
Yeah.
Gosh. Okay.
Yeah. So good to see you again and welcome back. For listeners who may not be familiar with your work, what would you like them to know about who you are and how you've come to know your vocation?
The most important thing is that I'm a Jesuit and a Jesuit priest. And I work mainly in helping people, as I see it, to come to encounter God in their life. I'm mostly a writer. I'm a priest, of course, but I'm mostly a writer in terms of my day job. I also do work with the LGBTQ community in the Catholic Church. And most recently, I have a book out called Come Forth, which is about the raising of Lazarus. And that's the thing I'm kind of most sort of focused on these days. But yeah, I think the most important thing for people to know is that I'm a Jesuit priest. And after, almost 40 years as a Jesuit priest, which is a little crazy.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know you had an interesting vocation story that included a journey into corporate America and out of it, and watching a PBS documentary about Thomas Merton and it causing you to contemplate your own life in a certain way.
Yeah, you got a good memory. I worked for 6 years for General Electric, formerly big company, now pretty much defunct. I worked in New York and worked in Connecticut and was on the corporate ladder, as they say. I was a yuppie back in the 1980s. For those who don't know, that's a young urban professional. It was a little bit of an insult back then, but that's what I was.
Yeah.
And I went to the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania and thought that was my career track. I was getting more and more discouraged with the corporate world, which is a real vocation, as you know, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really for me. And I came home one night and turned on the TV and saw a documentary about Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk. And that started me on this kind of quest and ended up at the Jesuits. Yeah, I mean, I always say my vocation came from a TV show, which is pretty funny.
Well, I think it says a lot about the importance of story in your life and in your journey, which makes sense for a Jesuit. I think of Jesuits as Ignatian spirituality as being so narrative. I wonder if that's your experience too.
You know, it's so funny you should say that. I've been a Jesuit since 1988, and that's the first time anyone has ever put it that way. That is really very insightful. Yeah, it is about story. And, you know, it's not like I read a book of theology, nothing wrong with theology, but I wasn't reading, you know, the Summa by Aquinas, nothing wrong with Aquinas, or
Right.
City of God by Augustine. It was his story. It was Merton's biography, right? And I later read Augustine's biography as one of the things that kind of helped me enter. Yeah, I think stories are just naturally appealing to people. And, you know, I always say that's one of the reasons that Jesus taught in stories. He taught in parables. When he is asked, who is my neighbor? He doesn't say, here are the 10 points that make up a neighbor.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Let's define neighbor,
yeah,
right?
Let's define neighbor.
Yeah.
He tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And, you know, when he wants to talk about forgiveness, he tells the story of the prodigal son. So I think there's something in us that naturally responds to stories. That's a very insightful comment. And yeah, I was responding to his story. Well, you know, Merton wrote a lot of books on prayer and theology, but it was his story that was really compelling. And I thought, well, if he could do it, maybe I could consider doing something like that. Yeah, so exactly.
Did it invite you to reflect on your own story and how God was working?
Well, you know, I'm smiling because I would not have put it that way. You know, all the things that are so familiar to us, and that even that question you asked, did it invite you to reflect on your story? I don't think if you had said that to me, I would not have known
Yeah.
what that meant. I was so miserable in the corporate world, really stressed out. And really, when I turned on that documentary and saw Thomas Merton in the monastery, I didn't know anything about monasteries. It looked so beautiful.
Mm.
And I just thought, on a very basic level, I don't want what I have, and I do want what he seems to have.
Mm.
And so it was a kind of drawing in that sense. I don't think I really said, all right, like, where is God in my story and how is God leading me? It was more like, this just seems like it's really more satisfying and more fulfilling. And it was just beautiful. I mean, as you know, I'm sure you visited monasteries, and
Oh yeah, and I've been to Gethsemane with our friend
yeah,
John several times actually.
yeah. And I mean, what was your experience there?
It's incredibly grounding,
Yeah,
right?
great word.
It's just like you can tell there's sacredness. There's something about the silence that feels like a holy presence.
And I would say, Julie, like, that was completely foreign to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I would maybe find that a little bit in church before Mass started,
Uh-huh.
but I'd never been on a retreat. I'd never been in a place that seemed like that. It was almost otherworldly. And I thought, boy, do places like this exist? I remember around the time, this is probably before your time, there was a book that came out called The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, which was a very popular book. It was later made into a movie with Sean Connery and Christian Slater.
Huh.
I would highly recommend it. It was really popular in the 80s and was about a murder in a monastery. Now, the monks are a little kind of nutty, but
Yeah.
the way they described the monastery, I thought, boy, this is really beautiful. And then to see that Merton documentary and to realize that these places still exist, or at least, as I saw, existed in 1948.
Right.
And then to kind of explore that and think about it and say, gosh, I could actually live in a place like that or something like that. I ended up not entering the Trappist monastery, but that just really appealed to me. And it was just kind of romantic, just sort of beautiful and lovely. And of course, that's the way God calls us. God calls us not through voices or visions, but,
yeah,
kind of that attraction, as you know.
Right. So how did you discern it? Like, what would your suggestions be for someone who's trying to sort through these attractions?
Yeah, my discernment was pretty elemental, which is this seems to be something I would like to do.
Uh-huh.
That's not a bad place to start. I think that oftentimes people think it really needs to be this kind of dramatic, falling on your knees and having this light from heaven, like Saul on the way to Damascus.
Right.
But I think that the more common way that it happens is that it's understanding a desire that is within you, that is a holy desire that seems to be coming from God. I think what I didn't do is really spend time in spiritual direction, which I certainly would encourage people to do. And, really to test it out too. I think the other big misconception, and I run into this sometimes with young people entering religious life or the priesthood, is that they have to be 100% convinced. Right? They have to know 100%. And that is especially difficult for people like in millennials, Gen Z, right?
Yeah.
So, I always say, look, this is what the novitiate is for. This is what seminary is for. I mean, you're supposed to test it out. So see how it goes.
Yeah.
But I think it's saying to yourself, well, if I could do anything I wanted to do, what would it be? And boy, if I answer a certain way, what does that mean? And what does that mean for my life? And what does it mean that God has sort of awakened this desire in me or placed that desire within me? So it's understanding your desires. I think it's getting some help. Obviously, it also depends on reality. Like if you think that the Trappist monastery is going to be one way and you go to Trappist monastery and it's another way, you say, I can't do it just on my fantasy of what a Trappist monastery is. And then finally, it's testing it out. It's, as St. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, would say, it's seeking confirmation. That this makes sense, that this works.
So it's like a gradual stepping forward, a trial. Like through experience, we come to learn what's real and true for who we are.
Yeah, and I would say, as you're talking, I was thinking, it's very much like a relationship. I mean, let's say you see someone who, the person's so attractive, they're so wonderful, I love them, I'm infatuated. Then you go out on a date and you see,
right?
Are they all they're cracked up to be? And maybe the way they look across the room is not the way they are in person. And then, of course, if it comes to, a long-term relationship or marriage, then you really have to say, all right, let's take this seriously. Let's talk about things. I think the final step, when you've made that commitment, whether it's marriage or religious life or the priesthood, is to say that no relationship and no state of life is going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I learned from Thomas Merton. I think I can almost quote this. The first and elemental test of any religious vocation, whether it's Trappist, Carthusian, Jesuit, or Benedictine, is the recognition that everyone in community is more or less imperfect.
Amen. Maybe I should have that on my email signature so people lower their bar.
No, it's really true, because you do tend to think, I'm going to be in this religious community with all these saints. There are lots of saints that I know in the Society of Jesus, living and dead, truly.
Right.
But there are a lot of guys, including myself, who are not saints.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a shock when you see people who are, very human. And I should have learned that from Merton, but I did not. I had to learn it on my own.
Just yesterday, I was in conversation with a discerner. She's like, I'm so attracted to this life, but I just really don't feel qualified. And I was like, well, I don't know what would qualify you, because I'm telling you, you're welcome to it,
Did she mean academically or?
No, like she felt so unworthy. She's like, I just don't think I'm pious and prayerful enough. And I don't even pray before I go to bed every night. And I was like, well, there's lots of ways to be in relationship with God. And we had to unravel, where do we get these stereotypes and these archetypes of how religious life is supposed to be? And then recognize that there's paths to holiness in every vocation and lifestyle, right?
Absolutely. I mean, single life, married life, right? What I run into most frequently would be that, I'm not holy enough, I'm not worthy enough, as if, who is worthy, right? I mean, unless you're, even St. Ignatius didn't feel worthy enough.
Right.
Unless you're married, Jesus, it's certainly sinful. And then I think the other thing I run into a lot is, well, I'm not smart enough. People have this stereotype, which is actually pretty funny. Oh, Jesuits, you all have PhDs. And I don't. Many of us don't. There's a great story. He's not particularly well known. His name is Alphonsus Rodriguez, and he is a Jesuit saint. He was a doorkeeper in Mallorca, Spain, and that was his job. He was a doorkeeper, a porter, and he became a saint from all the advice he gave out to people. But there's a great, great, great line. He entered the Jesuits quite late in his life, after I think his wife and all of his children had died. It was a very sad life.
Wow.
Anyway, so he wasn't particularly formally well educated, but a very holy man. I guess the vocation director, or whatever passed for that at the time, wrote to the provincial and said, well, I don't think he can enter to be a priest, because he's too old and maybe he's not as well educated. And the provincial said, well, then he can enter to be a saint.
Huh.
Which is beautiful. And that's what he became.
Yeah.
We don't remember the provincial's name, but we remember Alphonsus Rodriguez. So here's something simple. His spirituality, he was the porter, the doorkeeper at the college. And his spirituality was, whenever anyone knocked on the door, he would say to himself, I'm coming, Lord.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Isn't that gorgeous? Yeah. Yeah, so is he worthy? I mean, I'm not worthy to be in his company,
Right.
In people's own lives, they're called to be saints, right? You don't have to be Alphonsus Rodriguez or Mother Teresa. You can be yourself. And I think that's something, the universal call to holiness, is the Second Vatican Council talked about.
Amen. Amen. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to ask you one more question about your story, and then we'll talk more about you being a storyteller. How about that? So would you say, Jim, that you went through a conversion when you switched from the corporate world to religious life?
Yes. And I think, conversion, I mean, as you know, in the Greek, it's metanoia. Sometimes we use that as repentance, which, that's part of it. But conversion really is kind of a turning back to kind of who you really are. It was the first year of the novitiate. And look, to be perfectly honest, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into.
Of course not.
No, 27 years old. I think there was an element of oh, this is so cool. Look what I'm doing. And I got in, and it really was a huge shift. And it became less about doing and more about being, learning about prayer, working with the poor. It was a complete change for me. I went from going 100 miles an hour to 10 miles an hour. That's not to say we weren't working hard, but the kind of crazy, working 24/7 and working weekends and going nuts at GE and, just being under stress, that was replaced by prayer, talking about the Jesuits, working with the poor,
Yeah.
community meetings. I just found it beautiful. I still think the first year of my novitiate was probably the most exciting year of my life. I just thought, well, what, who knew about this? Why don't more people do this? So it was a conversion. I mean, as you know, in religious life, it's an ongoing conversion to the life of the vows and community life. But the most basic thing, I haven't thought about this for a long time. The most basic thing was this kind of slowing down and this realization that you don't have to go a million miles an hour.
As you say that, I'm reminded of an article I read a few months ago that talked about how really the evangelical councils is a way to resist capitalism and the grind of capitalism.
Sure. For people who don't know, the evangelical counsels are poverty, chastity, and obedience, and certainly poverty.
Yeah.
And you sort of withdraw yourself from the need to make money. Now we're, quite lucky. I mean, in a sense, and I'm sure your salary and stipends and royalties and anything goes to the community, which also provides for us. But I think there also is this sense in obedience that you're obedient to your superiors and through them to God, not to some corporation. And chastity also is this sort of radical act of, I think, self-gift to God and self-gift to other people. So, yeah, I think especially poverty. Different people have different challenges in terms of people who are not religious or priests. They sometimes don't get things, but I find it's the poverty that, like chastity, they say, oh, I get that. You're not married and priests aren't married and Jesuits aren't married. Obedience, they're like, well, I don't know if I get that. But poverty, there are all these questions like, so where do you get your money? And what happens to all the money you make? And what about your royalties? And I have some friends of mine who are actors. I'm not an actor, but ended up being part of this acting troupe. I talk about it in this book I wrote called A Jesuit Off Broadway.
Oh, yeah.
One day we were out to dinner. I'll never forget this, and you'll appreciate this. And they said, well, where does the money for your books go? And I said, to the Jesuits. And in my case, to America Media, my apostolate where I work. And they said, well, don't you see any of it? And I say, no. In fact, I had just gotten a check for $200,000. Yeah, for royalties. And I turned it in. And they said, well, don't you get like a reward, they said? And I said, no. I said, imagine it like your family.
Yeah.
If the mother or father comes home, they put it in the bank account. It's part of the family.
Right.
And they said, well, that's not fair. You should get a reward. And I just thought this was so charming. I said, what do you mean? They should give you a cruise.
A cruise.
A cruise. And I said, all right. And I actually did this. I said, I'm going to give you my provincial's email. And I want you to write him a letter saying, I deserve a cruise. And I said, part of it was like, this is what I signed up for. It's not as if I entered and suddenly they said, we want all your money. Yeah. And the other thing I tell them is that I wouldn't be doing any of this if I weren't a Jesuit. There is some kind of logic to it.
What compelled you to write a book about Lazarus?
A lot of things. So I love talking about Lazarus. When I was a boy, this is before your time, I was 16 in 1977 when this was kind of the chosen of my generation, Jesus of Nazareth, a miniseries that's still online. You can go on YouTube by Franco Zeffirelli, the great director. It was on TV, and it would be on TV at Christmas and Easter. This shows you how times have changed. On network TV, Jesus of Nazareth was on, ABC or NBC or CBS, and I watched it, and it was the scene of the raising of Lazarus that was the most dramatic in the whole picture. And Jesus goes to the tomb. He cries out in this British voice, Lazarus, come forth. And there's this long shot, and the tomb opens, they roll the stone away, and out of the blackness comes this figure, and the orchestra swells, and everyone falls to their knees. When I was young, I thought, oh my gosh, who is this guy? Who are these sisters, Martha and Mary, that talk to Jesus so bluntly? And it started me on a kind of lifelong quest to just understand what is often called Jesus's greatest miracle. And then many years later, I went to the Holy Land with a friend of mine as part of research for this book I did called Jesus, a Pilgrimage.
Yeah.
And I asked the Jesuit who was the superior in Jerusalem where we were staying, what do you think we should see? And he was listing all these things, obviously the Sea of Galilee, this. And then he said Lazarus's tomb. And I was like, what? I said, you could see that? And he said, of course. And it's in this place called Al Azariah, which means the place of Lazarus, current day Bethany. And I went, it was quite moving. I started leading pilgrims there. And the theme of the book is what are we called to kind of leave behind in our tombs, right? And how can we hear God kind of calling us forth? And when I would bring pilgrims there and suggest that meditation, they would kind of come out crying. And I thought, you know what, I need to write about this. So I spent most of COVID writing it and really diving deep into it. The book is a combination of biblical exegesis. So really, what does the Bible say? What John 11. Spirituality, what does the story mean for us today? A little bit of a travelogue, like what is it like there today? And then a little bit of a cultural history of Lazarus through the fine arts, poetry, film, TV, fiction. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And he's everywhere. I really, really, really enjoyed working on this book. And it's because I think the story is really relevant to all of us, whatever time of year you're in. There are two other times when Jesus raises people from the dead, which people tend to forget. One is the widow of Nain's son, where he's being carried out in the funeral procession. And the other is Jairus's daughter. But in the story of Lazarus, he's in the tomb.
Yeah.
In the widow of Nain's son, he's being carried out in the funeral procession. In Jairus's daughter, in that story, she's just died. But one of the things about the raising of Lazarus, as I point out in the book, is that he's dead. He's been dead for a couple of days. He's in the tomb. They even say to sort of strengthen that, Lord, there will be a stench.
It sounds like you had some sort of emotional and spiritual reaction to the story in your youth that's just informed your life ever since.
I don't feel like I was calling upon it when I was growing up. You know what I mean? Like when I was entering the Jesuits, I wasn't saying, oh, just like Lazarus.
Yeah.
But it held a kind of fascination for me. And then when I entered the Jesuits and started praying about it on retreats and, really spending time with scripture, the story and what I do in the book is to take it apart almost sentence by sentence. Each part is really interesting. Like, why does Jesus wait for a couple days? What does it mean when the sisters say, if you had been here, are they scolding him or are they sort of professing their faith? And then one of the things that I find fascinating is at the end, Jesus says two things: take away the stone and untie him and let him go. And, you have to think, well, why does he say that? Because he could have just snapped his fingers and Lazarus would have appeared, like Jesus appears behind closed doors after Easter. And why does he say, unbind him? Lazarus could have appeared naked or clothed or whatever. And it's a sense that the crowd is being called to participate in the miracle, which I love.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing is, like, as I've reflected on it, its impact has really kind of deepened in me. And the other thing I want to say is when I first went to the tomb, I went in, it's quite powerful, and they're pretty sure that this is the place. It's a first century tomb in Bethany that has been venerated for, since the earliest time of the church.
Wow.
I was all by myself and I just thought, well, what am I going to pray about? And then I thought, well, what do I want to leave behind? That's really what came out. What do I want to leave here?
Yeah.
And what is it that keeps us bound or unfree or stuck? And I think we all have things like that. I'm sure you have things like that. I wish I could get rid of this part of me or this resentment or this grudge or this pattern or this destructive behavior or whatever. And can we leave that behind and ask God to call us into new life? And it was quite powerful. This, Julia, from spiritual direction and working with people, the things that impact you don't necessarily impact other people.
Right.
And so here's this poem or this prayer or this movie and people are like, yeah, okay. It didn't do much. So I thought when I was suggesting this particular meditation of leaving this stuff behind, people would say, oh, that wasn't. People came out of the tomb crying. And I thought, wow, okay. I really need to write a book on this, which is, as I said, how it kind of came to be.
Now I'm curious about the power of place. As a pilgrim, what is the importance of praying in certain places?
Yeah, well, I think it's important, but before I answer the question, to say to your listeners, when I answer this question, I never want to make people feel like, oh, if you don't go to Lazarus's tomb, you're not going to have this experience. Or if you don't go to the Holy Land, especially now, it's
Right.
so
Yeah. I
difficult.
don't expect to go in my lifetime.
Well, you never know. I'm very careful because for reasons of health or money or time, mostly time or safety, people's concerns, most people aren't going to go there. God can give you these experiences in your bedroom, in your kitchen, or in your living room, in your church. Going there, however, I think really grounds you in the reality of Jesus's life. And I think the place that I felt that the most was the Sea of Galilee. Because, look, maybe we're 99% sure that this is what Lazarus's tomb was. Well, here's the thing. We are 100% sure this is the Sea of Galilee.
Right.
And this is it. Like, it's always been the Sea of Galilee. It will always be the Sea of Galilee. Jesus saw this.
Yeah.
And you can't get away from that. And that, even saying it, just sort of makes me have goosebumps. To say he saw this, and probably from this particular angle. It's largely unchanged. There's very little development or houses. It's not like there's the resorts or amusement parks or whatever, or even many churches there are a lot of churches, but it's not covered with churches or buildings. It looks remarkably the same as it was in Jesus's time. You remind me of something a pilgrim said, which I really liked. And he said, I obviously always believed this. I obviously believed in Jesus, but it was almost like this was like a mythical place.
Huh.
And
Yeah.
he said, I can't believe I'm here. And that's what everybody says. And so going there, I think, can ground you in the reality of Jesus. And it also explains a lot of things in the Gospels that don't make sense. Like, well, why does he do this? Oh, when you go there, you say, oh, well, this is what this means. The first time I went, you'll love this, I said to a sister, Franciscan sister, actually, who was running a hostel on the Sea of Galilee, I was looking across and I said, what is that over there? Looking at the, opposite shore. And she said, oh, that's the other side. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's what they say. He got in the boat and he went to the other side, and there it is.
Yeah.
You can see it wouldn't have taken that long, and how he's able to kind of crisscross all these places so easily because they're so close. So that kind of stuff, it grounds it spiritually, but it also explains a lot practically.
So that sounds like a intellectual experience of like, oh, now all these puzzle pieces fit together. But what about in one's body or in one's soul? How does place inform that part of a person?
That's a very insightful question. I would say the intellectual insight actually does change you. I'll give you an example. It's a long story, and I talk about it in the book. There's a place called the Bay of Parables. And the Bay of Parables is where, by tradition, Jesus preached the parables. Now, people who might not have been there will say, well, how do they know that? Well, the reason is there's only a couple places where this could be, as they describe it, where Jesus is in a boat and he gets out and he preaches to the crowd. There's only a few places between Capernaum and Bethsaida and Tagba where this could be, right?
Yeah.
And there's one place where it's supposed to have been, and it makes sense. So when I went there to the Bay of Parables, where he preached the parables about the rocky ground and the thorny ground and the fertile ground, I looked around me and there was rocks, fertile ground, and thorns.
2,000 years later. Amazing.
Yes. No one had planted them there. It wasn't some amusement park called Jesus Land where,
Right.
And I thought, well, when he was doing the parables, he wasn't saying some people are like rocks. He was probably saying some people are like those rocks there, or those thorns there, or that fertile ground there. And it grounded it in a way that intellectually I understood that this is probably what he was doing, but it also made me feel this is real. He's speaking to people, as one scripture scholar said, in their everyday lives, In my body, I was so jet lagged. It made me feel like rooted.
Oh.
I think the other thing is like he comes to a particular place and a particular time.
Yeah.
It's quite profound. And I don't know any pilgrim who comes away, they all say the same thing. When I hear the scripture stories, I think of them in a completely different way.
That makes sense to me. I've been fortunate to visit Assisi, of course.
Oh, beautiful. Well,
You know,
it's the same experience. You say, this is where he was.
yeah, this is where St. Francis was.
Yeah.
And these stories make sense now that I've been in
Yes.
these places. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
But it takes on a different meaning for me too. Yeah. It deepens it. I am fascinated if your study, your writing, your storytelling, your pilgrimages over the years, I'm curious if that has increased faith for you, or is doubt something that you still have to confront?
Oh, no, it's definitely increased faith. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I find that there are certain places that you go to and you cannot not feel something. One is the Sea of Galilee.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go there and not feel something, at least everyone I know. Another is Assisi, which I feel like is like an outdoor church. That's how
Yeah.
I imagine it. The third is Lourdes. Fourth is Rome. I think I said three, but now I'm going longer. So, I've had so many experiences on retreat and on a pilgrimage and in study that have moved me. I mean, not every day, that have deepened my faith. The doubt, I don't really struggle with that as much. I mean, I believe in God. I have doubt about, some things that might be going on in the church, or I certainly don't understand suffering and those kinds of things. But I've never doubted, since I entered the Jesuits, I've never doubted God's existence or Jesus's divinity or anything like that.
Yeah.
Now, it's hard to understand. I mean, I don't pretend to, there are mysteries after all. Like I said, I mean, I think it's mostly challenges in the church or with the church, but everybody struggles with that. It's sometimes hard for me to understand people who say, I don't denigrate them, but who say, oh, I'm so angry about this, whatever going on in the church, and it's shaking my faith in God. And I'm like, those are two different things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. It says something about, even for me, like catechesis and our church has some work to do about helping people understand the difference. Okay. I really don't want this conversation to conclude without hearing a little bit about your thoughts on the church in light of your experience at the Synod, especially. So I know you could speak about that for hours. I'm sure you have a lot to say. So what are some of your major things that you learned from your experience of being part of the Synod?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a little bit of a setup for those who don't know, the Synod took place between 2021 and 2024. We had 2 sessions in person in 2023 and 2024. It was really about how the church can be more listening, more participatory, more inclusive, the terrible word, more synodal. And we put out a final document that I hope everybody will read. I think one of the surprising things, in a good way, I think if you had asked me this, I would have said, well, that makes sense. But it was a quote from St. John Paul II that now Cardinal Timothy Radcliffe used during our first retreat. And it really put it all in perspective, which is affective collegiality precedes effective collegiality. I went back to that over and over, which means when you become friends with people, it's easier to talk about difficult topics and to be collegial and to come to some consensus. And that was borne out time and time again. I mean, I sat around a table for weeks on end with certain people, sometimes 1 week, sometimes a couple weeks, with people who have quite different opinions about certain things in the church than I do. I mean, obviously on the basics, we can all stand up and say the creed, and we became friends.
Yeah.
And that made it easier to talk about things. So that's the first thing, that kind of lesson in a polarized church, particularly where I would imagine most of your listeners are in the U.S., where it's very polarized, just like our politics. The synodality and listening can be really, I think, a way out. The other thing that I took away was that some of these changes that we want in the church are going to happen slowly because it is such a universal church. And look, we all know this. You and I have studied this. Anyone who's listening to this knows it's different in the U.S. than it is in some other countries. But I'll give you an example, if you don't mind. This just blew me away. So in the working document this year, which was like our kind of basis for conversation, there was a very banal statement, which you'd think everyone would agree to. And the statement was something like, I'm going to paraphrase, the center of a parish's liturgical life is the Sunday Mass, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Say, oh, of course. blah, blah, blah. Well, this woman from Oceania said, actually, where I live, there aren't priests for 500 miles.
Wow.
And so we may have a mass every month, not because people don't want it or people are somehow anti-mass, but because there aren't priests.
Yeah.
And so that statement makes no sense in my culture. And I just thought, oh my gosh. Another statement which blew me away, that there are rich churches and poor churches in the Catholic Church, is a scandal. Now, I would say absolutely there shouldn't be. And these two bishops from Africa at my table said, no, that's ridiculous. There will always be rich and poor. That's the way it is in the world. And the rich churches help the poor churches. And that's a beautiful thing. And the poor churches teach the rich churches about poverty and simplicity. And so, get this,
Wow.
It's not a scandal, it's a good.
It's a good.
And I just thought, oh my gosh.
Right.
I don't know if I agree with that totally, but I guess my point is, for anything to change in a church that is so universal is going to take time.
Yeah.
And that's, what Francis is particularly interested in is not only synodality and listening to people. The key to synodality is to recognize that the Holy Spirit is at work in everybody, not just in cardinals and bishops and archbishops, right? Everyone, as they called us, non-bishops, which I love. That's actually what they called us.
Okay.
But to wrap up, Francis, in terms of moving the church and changing what needs to be changed, one of the conversions I had was to say, this is going to take time.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Unity is a value as well.
I wasn't there. I was following the media and paying attention, but I'm not surprised to hear you say that, because that was sort of my own reflection. Is even from culture to culture, we have different senses of what time is and what's appropriate timing and how timelines should work and patience. And even with that, we have so much complexities to work with as a global church. And I think that's part of the beauty of it.
It is.
But yeah, maybe in our culture where we tend to be very fast paced and value productivity, we just really want to see accomplishments and change so quickly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, I think part of it is there's some good things about Western culture and American culture, and my former boss, Tom Reese, former editor of America Now, Religion News Service correspondent, who I know you know, had a very funny, tongue-in-cheek, but actually thoughtful article that said, what if Americans ran the Synod? And he said there'd be an agenda, we would have discussions, we would vote, and we would put out a document like in a week.
Right.
And, we're both laughing about that. But, parts of it aren't so bad. Like the efficiency in getting things done, versus, more kind of process model that they have. But you're right. It's different ways of looking at time, different ways of looking at how the Spirit works.
Yeah.
But it did remind me from a practical point of view, for example, what Francis is up against. And I also know that things that seem obvious or banal or tepid in the U.S. are a big deal in other countries, like a big deal. And so one of the phrases I hate, I post something about, like, for example, there were two women who were just appointed to the General Secretariat of the Synod, which is a huge step forward. And people wrote, well, not enough. And I thought, okay, not enough in the U.S., but in other parts of the world, too much. So we have to remember how those things land in other places.
Yeah, yeah. For as much as we talk about cultural sensitivity, humility, DEI, where, those are the buzzwords in the United States for the past 4 years, we sometimes might not think about this globally. And that invites from some work for our American Catholic Church.
Yeah. And like I said, it's a two-way street. Like on the one hand, you don't want to say everything about American culture is bad. We have a lot of things to contribute. And one of them is working hard, getting stuff done, being blunt, right? Being organized, versus other people at the Synod who would always, when they would talk, it would be going round and round. And a lot of times at my table with other Americans, I'd say, the few times I was with an American at the table, usually I wasn't, it would be like, come on, land the plane. To be blunt, Americans can teach, but we also have to learn, right? And that's hard. That's hard for us sometimes.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. We've explored a lot of topics today, Jim, and I would love to offer you an opportunity. Here we are in Messy Jesus Business to just offer a chance for you to update your words from 4 years ago on what you are learning and discovering about the messiness of gospel living.
Messiness. I love that. Messy Jesus. Well, Francis did say, make a mess.
Yeah.
I think that the most challenging thing,
Mm.
and I would think a lot of listeners would know this, is really discerning what the best thing to do is at any one time.
Mm.
In my family, in my religious community, among my friends, with my work, with my health, with politics. And I think one of the challenges is I always say, look, if God were to come down and say to me, okay, well, here's what you need to do. You need to do X, Y, Z. I would say, done. I'll do it. So I don't think it's a lack of willingness among people and among your listeners to do what God asks. It's trying to discern what that is.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the messiness comes in. Not to go back to the book, but I really think that's why the story of Lazarus is so helpful, because one of the things that we can do always, every day, is, again, to leave behind anything that prevents us from following God. We all know what those things are.
Yeah.
Selfishness or pride or arrogance or whatever. And I think that's something that we can all do and know that we're doing the right thing, by trying to be freer and to live more closely to the gospel. It is messy. I sometimes think one of my sort of fantasies is I'll get to heaven and I'll say to God about a particular episode, like, what was that all about? And did I do the right thing? And what was I supposed to do? So I think that's the messiness. The messiness is it's not carrying out what God wants. It's trying to discern what it is and then carrying it out,
Right.
I sometimes, when I was little, I used to think, wouldn't it be great if Jesus every year he would come in and, kind of give us a little update.
I know, right? I agree.
But the answer to the question is we already have the knowledge of what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is discerning how to apply it in our particular ways and our particular circumstances. That's where the messiness comes in.
Back to the scandal
particularity, right? And that's a good point. And then that's also the other messiness is what happens when someone else has a different discernment, right?
Yeah.
So,
which we both know a lot about being in community.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Yeah. Well, Jim, how can our listeners buy all your books, support your work, your ministry, support the Jesuits? What would you like them to follow up on?
Sure. So I'm all over social media. I'm on Facebook as Father James Martin, S.J. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, and what's the other one? Threads as James Martin, S.J. for Society.
I don't know how you keep it up, by the way. I don't know how you do it.
I don't post that often. And then the ministry I do with LGBTQ people is called outreach.faith. That's up there. And then the recent book is Come Forth, The Promise of Jesus' Greatest Miracle. And that is in print, audio, and what's the other one? Ebook. And then in February, it's coming out in paperback with an introduction by Pope Francis, which I'm really excited about.
That's so exciting. Congratulations, Jim.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you so much. And so I'm easy to find. Just Google me and it'll all come up.
Thank you so much for coming on Messy Jesus Business.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Messy Jesus Business is produced and edited by Colin Wamskans. You can find us online at messyjesusbusiness.com and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon. If you like what you heard, please be sure to mention our podcast to your friends and followers. And we'd love to have your support via Patreon. From the bottom of our hearts and the middle of the mess, thank you. Messy Jesus Business is produced in partnership with the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. You can learn more about our religious community and donate to our mission at www.fspa.org. I'm Sister Julia Walsh, and I'll catch up with you next time. Until then, peace and all good.